When you think about the most dominant pitching seasons of all time, there's a couple that usually come to mind. Bob Gibson and his legendary 1968 season are usually leading that discussion. Sandy Koufax's best and final season in 1966, Doc Gooden's sophomore year in 1985, Pedro Martinez's ridiculous 2000 season, Greg Maddox's shortened 1994 season, and more recently Jake Arrieta's 2015 campaign are some of the many contenders to Gibson. All of those seasons, amongst the other fantastic pitching seasons in the league's history, all have essentially one thing in common. At the end of the year, it was clear that they were the best in their league and they walked away with the Cy Young Award. But there is one season within the past decade that was as dominant as the aforementioned, but often forgot about because not only did he not win the Cy Young Award, but he didn't even receive a single vote. In 2012, Kris Medlen took the baseball world by storm when he went on one of the single best stretches in the history of baseball. Every time he started a game, it was almost a guaranteed win for the Braves, as he went 28 consecutive starts without recording a loss, and the Braves winning an MLB record 23 straight games in which he started. His ERA would teeter around the 1.0 mark, and his pinpoint command and devastating stuff kept hitters off the bases and runs off the board. But his 12-game stretch to close out the 2012 season was the icing on the cake for a remarkable season for Medlen, one which rivaled some of the best pitching seasons in Major League Baseball's history. Kris Medlen began the 2012 season as sort of an unknown for the Atlanta Braves. He was entering his fourth full season in the major leagues and spent time in both the bullpen and in their rotation. Tommy John surgery prematurely ended his sophomore year in 2010 and limited him to just 2 1/3 innings in 2011. The rotation for Atlanta entering 2012 was pretty stacked, with a young Mike Minor, Tim Hudson, and the late great Tommy Hanson leading the charge. So Medlen was kind of in a pickle. Manager Freddie Gonzalez opted to give the young right-hander a shot, and Medlen made the Major League club as a reliever entering that year. Initially, he was pretty solid out of the pen, but after struggling a bit towards the end of May, he was sent down to AAA. After about 2 weeks in the minor leagues, Medlen was back in Atlanta and began throwing the ball like a man on a mission. His next 17 games saw him pitch to a 1.38 ERA with 19 Ks across 26 very strong innings, and he brought his season ERA down from a 3.49 to a more respectable 2.48. He was throwing the ball about as well as anyone in the league, and his great performance had finally earned him a chance to prove what he could do as a starter. On July 31st, 2012, he took the ball at home against the Miami Marlins, and for the first time in 727 days, Kris Medlen started a Major League Baseball game. His first start in nearly 2 years went pretty well. 4 hits, 1 run, a walk, and 3 Ks over 5 pretty solid innings gave Medlen his first win as a starting pitcher in nearly 2 years. He'd take the ball 5 days later at home again, this time against the Houston Astros, and would dominate over 5 1/3 innings. 6 days later, the Mets would touch him up for a run, and that'd be the last earned run he'd allow for nearly a month. He'd notch his first career complete game shutout against the San Diego Padres in his next start, then head to DC to hold the Nats scoreless over 7 frames, and then travel to San Diego to face those Padres again, shutting them out through 8 and tying a career high with 9 punch-outs. He'd follow that up with his second career complete game against the Rockies, allowing an unearned run and setting a new career high with 12 Ks. He'd face the Mets again, who'd give him his first earned run since the last time he faced them, over 41 innings ago. He'd square up with the Nats again, setting a new career high with 13 strikeouts in just 7 innings of work before being lifted. His last 3 starts of the year saw some familiar divisional foes in the Marlins and the Mets, allowing just 3 runs over 21 innings to end his season on a 9-game winning streak with an incredible 1.57 ERA for the season. That final win against the Mets was Medlen's 28th straight start in which he did not record a loss, tying him with Dave McNally for the second longest streak in history. Roger Clemens holds that record at 30 straight starts without a loss during his tenure with the Toronto Blue Jays. That final start was also Medlen's 23rd consecutive start that the Braves won, which is the longest streak in Major League Baseball history. Both of those streaks date back to Medlen's rookie year in 2009 and concluded on his final start of 2012. Now, these aren't to be confused with Garrett Cole's streak of 20 consecutive decisions with a victory that ended for him last season. Medlen didn't record a win in every decision in these streaks. In fact, he only recorded 14 decisions, but the Braves did pull out the win every time he started. Cole had the 3rd longest consecutive winning decision streak in MLB history snapped at 20 in August of 2020, along with his streak of 27 straight starts without recording a loss, one behind Kris Medlen's 28. Now, there's 2 key parts about Medlen's spectacular 2012 season that I want to focus on and highlight. One is the final 12 starts, which we just touched on briefly, but we'll go into more depth, and the other is his season as a whole, and how it matches up in the pillars of baseball history. Let's dive into those last 12 starts first and see how they compare to some of the greatest 12-game stretches in big league history. Medlen was simply overpowering during his 12 starts in the 2012 season. Pinpoint control and devastating movement on his breaking balls made it tough for hitters to make contact, let alone get a hit. They all knew they were going to get a ball around the plate, but still couldn't really do anything with it. Of those 12 starts, Medlen posted a 9-0 record while striking out 84 over 83 and 2/3 innings, to the tune of a .97 ERA and a .805 whip. Opposing hitters were hitting to the tune of just a .483 OPS during his starts. For a little context, Medlen himself put up a .348 OPS at the plate during his starts, so essentially Major League hitters were hitting slightly better than the Major League pitcher in Medlen hit against Major League pitchers. But 12 starts is sort of a small sample size, right? You can't really compare 12 starts and barely over 83 innings against some of the best pitching seasons of all time. But what about the best 12-game stretches during the best pitching seasons of all time? Let's see how Medlen's 12-game stretch compares to the likes of Gibson, Maddox, Koufax, Gooden, Martinez, and Arrieta. Taking the best 12-game stretches of those 6 legendary seasons and comparing them to the 12-game stretch that Medlen went on to close out 2012, only Arrieta and Gibson had a 12-game stretch that was better in terms of ERA. Those 3 in Arrieta, Gibson, and Medlen are also the only 3 of that group to go a perfect 12-0 during those starts. It's well documented just how dominant Jake Arrieta was to close out his 2015 season, basically coming out of nowhere to take home the NL Cy Young Award and establish himself as arguably the best pitcher in the game. Bob Gibson's 1968 is the best pitching season of all time, and his stretch from June to July was the best of his best. And then there's Medlen, sandwiched right in there with those legendary campaigns. Let's say that Medlen made those 12 starts during the shortened 2020 season, when starting pitchers made around 11 or 12 starts apiece. Comparing his 2012 starts against every pitcher who made at least 10 starts in 2020, he'd have the lowest ERA by more than half a point, the most wins, the lowest OPS, the second most wins probability added, the second most innings pitched, and the third lowest whip. In layman's terms, Medlen's stretch was better than any single pitching performance from last season. But the difference was Medlen's starts were at the tail end of his season and not his entire season, like every pitcher in 2020's was. In fact, Medlen wasn't even able to qualify for any of the statistical leaderboards in 2012, coming up about 20 innings short of the necessary threshold. But let's take what he did do and compare his entire 2012 season as a whole and see where it compares to some of the best pitching seasons of all time. Of pitchers with at least 138 innings pitched and 12 starts made in the live ball era, Medlen's 1.57 ERA ranks 4th behind Maddox's 1994 season, Doc Gooden's 1985 season, and of course, Gibson's 1968 season. In fact, this entire top 10 led the league in ERA during their respective seasons, with Medlen being the lone exception. His .909 winning percentage is the second best in the history of Major League Baseball, trailing only Johnny Allen, who went 15-1 for the 1937 Cleveland Indians. If you're more of an ERA plus fan, Medlen's 2.56 ERA plus would be 5th behind only Gibson's 1968, Maddox's 94 and 95, and Pedro Martinez's 2000 seasons. He held hitters to just a 46 OPS plus, the 13th best of all time behind Hall of Famers Pedro Martinez, Greg Maddux, and Randy Johnson, Cy Young Award winners Clayton Kershaw, Corey Kluber, Jake Arrieta, Zach Greinke, and Johan Santana, with Chris Sale's 2018 season sprinkled in there as well. All instantly recognizable names and dominant pitchers. And Kris Medlen. Medlen's stellar performance earned him the start for the first ever wildcard game in 2012 at home in Atlanta. If it weren't for a couple of errors and arguably the least controversial infield fly call in the history of baseball, then the Braves probably would have advanced. Instead, Medlen and his phenomenal year were brushed under the table, and their whole season was just a big what if, as the focus of the 2012 Braves shifted away from him and onto the now infamous call. He'd enter the 2013 season as the team's number 2 starter, and would drop his first start, snapping his consecutive games started without a loss streak and consecutive victory streak by the Braves when he starts. He'd come down to earth a little bit, going 15-12 with a 3.11 ERA over 197 innings, and again was snubbed from the All-Star team and didn't receive a single Cy Young Award vote. A second Tommy John surgery would cause him to miss all of 2014, and after signing free agent deal with the Kansas City Royals in 2015, Kris Medlen became a World Series champion. After some more arm and shoulder issues, Medlen attempted to make a comeback with the Arizona Diamondbacks in 2018, nearly 2 years removed from his last game as a Royal in 2016. He'd pitch in one game against the Astros and get touched up for 7 runs over 4 innings, and retire less than a week later. This was the same time period when the Astros were stealing signs, and Medlen, unfortunately, was one of those victims. When the news first broke about the sign-stealing scandal, Medlen's former teammate Freddie Freeman got pretty emotional in talking about the unfortunate end to his friend's career.
And it's kind of emotional for me because I really do love Kris, and he works so hard to get back to the big league. So that's what hits me. cheating is cheating, but when you mess with people's lives and careers, that's what's the hard thing. Yeah.
Kris Medlen isn't going to be synonymous with the greatest pitchers of all time, but his 2012 season should be. He was average at best and had a pretty solid career, but his impressive 2012 should be regarded and remembered as one of the finest pitching seasons in history. Those 12 starts were one of the best stretches a starting pitcher has ever had, and his season overall was amongst the best in the history of baseball.